The Eight Immortals Travel East Chapter 12.
So I want you to picture a battlefield. You've got two massive armies. They're exhausted, basically just running on adrenaline, and they're staring each other down across a river.
Right, it's a very classic setup.
Exactly. I mean, we've all seen this scene in historical epics, you know? We expect the yelling, the dramatic charge, the clash of weapons right out of the gate.
Yeah, total chaos immediately.
But what if the deadliest, most consequential part of the confrontation wasn't the physical violence at all?
Oh, that's the real question.
Right, like what if right in the middle of a literal war zone, the real battle was actually this high-stakes, unnervingly modern philosophical debate?
It completely forces us to reevaluate the entire mechanics of conflict. Suddenly, a skirmish over a border isn't just about territory anymore.
No, not at all.
It becomes this violent collision of two completely incompatible frameworks for reality.
And that collision is our mission for you today. We're going straight into the heart of a classic piece of Ming Dynasty literature.
Yes, an amazing text.
It really is. It's an excerpt from Chapter 12 of Journey to the East, which is also known as Zhongli. And we're zeroing in on this single legendary sequence titled Zhongli and Buyu Engage in Battle.
Sounds intense just from the title.
Right. But we aren't just here to, tally up sword swings or give you a basic plot summary. We are unpacking how this text brilliantly and honestly almost subversively weaves together gritty, physical combat with a really profound clash of political ideology.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenal text for exactly that reason. I mean, we're looking at an absolute masterclass in how institutional power constructs a moral justification for its violence. And then on the flip side, how rebellion actively dismantles that exact justification.
Yeah, it's definitely not your standard good versus evil fairy tale.
Not at all. It's a deeply cynical, really brilliant look at the narratives we use to justify power. And it all culminates in a fight where, honestly, honor just completely goes out the window.
Oh, completely. So let's set the stage. We find ourselves at the Qi River, the Han army representing the Imperial Center, and the Northern fan troops representing the frontier have just arrived.
And the text explicitly notes they've been marching double time. That detail really matters.
Right. Because these aren't fresh troops. They are physically exhausted, operating on just a razor's edge of tension.
Exactly.
So they set up their opposing camps, and the next morning, that tension finally snaps. You have a cannon firing, gongs and drums absolutely roar across the landscape.
It's deafening.
Yeah. And from out of the formations, the two champions finally ride out.
And, the visual framing the author uses here is highly intentional. The aesthetics, they're not just decorative.
No, they're doing a lot of work.
Right, they're doing heavy lifting to establish the psychological baseline of the conflict.
It's completely overwhelming. Let's look at the Han general, Zhongli. He emerges with eyebrows that are described as twin swords, a vermilion face, so this striking, deeply red complexion.
Very intimidating.
Very, and he is draped in red robes and golden armor, holding a spear. Then his opponent, the fan general Zhan Buyu, rides out. He's in a golden helmet, silver armor, wielding this massive broadsword.
Quite the contrast, definitely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I read this entrance, it feels like an ancient version of psychological warfare through pure pageantry, you know?
Oh, for sure.
It reminds me of, the pyrotechnics in a modern pro wrestling introduction. It's entirely designed to visually dominate the opponent before anyone even moves a muscle.
That's a great comparison. The pageantry is absolutely a weapon. It projects absolute invulnerability.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is how the author inserts a specific poem right at this moment to escalate those visuals. It takes it from a mere human standoff into a literal cosmic event.
The poem is wild.
It really is. It doesn't just describe their shiny armor. It explicitly frames this impending violence as something that's tearing at the fabric of the natural order itself.
The imagery is just intense. I mean, the poem says their martial aura makes heaven and earth split, and that gods and demons are startled.
Yeah, and consider the mechanism of that imagery, right? The poem describes the army's flags messing up the white clouds and the sound of the gongs shaking the mountain peaks.
Shaking the mountains. Wow.
The author is telling the reader that the stakes of this specific confrontation are so high, the human violence is actually polluting the physical environment.
Oh, I hadn't thought of it like that.
Yeah, it declares that safety and danger hangs on one strike. This is an incredibly sophisticated way of telling you that you're watching a pivot point in history.
A pivot point that could literally tear the sky apart. I mean, with a buildup like that, you'd expect them to just instantly charge and start hacking away at each other.
You would.
But they don't. The drums are roaring, the armor is gleaming, but the generals just hold their ground. Because before you can physically destroy an enemy, you have to morally justify their destruction.
Right. Words are the first weapon drawn. And that necessity to vocalize the conflict, I think, is what elevates this from a simple action scene to an intellectual powerhouse. They literally cannot fight until they articulate the worldview that requires the other to die.
So Zhongli, the Han general, he makes the first move. And he delivers a speech that is essentially the ultimate defense of the traditional empire.
This textbook.
Yeah, he looks across at Buyu and argues that China treats its neighbors, he refers to them as the four barbarians, like its own children. It's this incredibly thick, paternalistic framing.
Which is the absolute bedrock of the historical tributary system.
Yeah.
He outlines the exact mechanics of how this empire sustains its power.
Right. He explains the empire's policy, basically. Ignore those who don't submit, but for those who do pay tribute, reward them lavishly. The text actually uses the phrase thick going, thin coming.
Which means, essentially, a frontier state brings a modest tribute, the thin coming,
right,
and the emperor showers them with a massive amount of wealth in return.
The thick going. It's an economic strategy.
Exactly. Zhongli lays this economic reality out and says, look, everyone else respects this system. Why are you causing trouble?
And then he gives Buyu this really stark ultimatum: surrender quickly, keep your titles, and be touched by imperial grace. Or persist in this error and be ground to dust.
Yeah, that phrase, ground to dust, it's a violent tonal whiplash from the benevolent father figure he just claimed to be seconds prior.
It's completely jarring. I mean, I have to ask, isn't this essentially ancient political gaslighting?
It certainly reads like it.
Right. Zhongli is sitting on a warhorse, gripping a spear, threatening to literally grind these people into powder, while simultaneously claiming to be their loving, benevolent parent. Like, how does that cognitive dissonance even work?
Well, it looks like gaslighting to our modern sensibilities for sure, but we really have to understand the ontology of the Ming Dynasty worldview that Zhongli represents.
Okay.
Because he isn't being cynical. He isn't, putting on a PR spin. He truly believes in a sinocentric world order, where submission to the center is synonymous with morality itself.
Wow.
The empire doesn't just view itself as a political state, it views itself as the sole source of cosmic order.
So in his mind, rebelling isn't just a political disagreement, it's an actual crime against the universe.
Precisely. You mentioned his offer to let them be touched by imperial benevolence.
Yeah.
The Chinese term used there is Zhan Huangren. For Zhongli, the Han army isn't just a military force, it's a vehicle for civilizing the world. Violence is just a tragic but necessary tool to bring errant children back into the moral fold.
So if you resist...
If you resist the empire, you aren't an enemy combatant with a valid grievance. You are an agent of chaos. You're fundamentally uncivilized. And you cannot negotiate with chaos, You can only eradicate it.
Man, that is an incredibly suffocating ideological trap. If someone tells you that your very existence as an independent entity is a moral failing, how do you even respond to that?
It's tough.
You'd kind of expect the barbarian general to just scream in frustration and attack, playing right into the role of the mindless agent of chaos.
But Zhan Buyu doesn't do that.
No. He calmly, systematically dismantles Zhongli's entire worldview.
And this is really where the text becomes truly extraordinary. Buyu's rebuttal is, frankly, one of the most astonishingly bold arguments in classical literature.
Let me walk you guys through what Buyu actually says. He starts by flat-out rejecting the premise of imperial ownership. He says the world does not belong to one ruler, it belongs to the world.
Huge statement.
Right, and the people who should rule are simply those with high talent and quick feet, meaning those who are actually capable.
Yeah.
Then he calls out the historical hypocrisy. He reminds Zhongli that the Han dynasty didn't just, sprout out of the ground. They conquered this land from someone else.
Exactly.
Therefore, the Fan can conquer it from the Han. He describes this shifting of power as just a natural cycle of multiplication and division.
And that specific math metaphor is devastating.
It really is.
It strips away all the mystical divine authority the empire claims. It reduces the mandate of heaven to basic arithmetic.
It's literally just shifting variables. But then Buyu takes it a step further, and this is the part that actually stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, yeah.
He argues that heaven and earth created all humans as one body. Therefore, fundamentally, there is no difference between domestic and foreign, and absolutely no difference between Hua, the civilized Chinese center, and Yi, the barbarian periphery.
It's incredible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I read Buyu's argument, and it sounds fiercely modern. It reads like the justification for a hostile corporate takeover driven by extreme meritocracy.
Right. Yeah.
He's basically saying, look, we have the talent, we are taking your market share, and your legacy branding as the civilized center is a total fiction.
Well, I'd push back slightly on the corporate takeover analogy, only because we have to be careful not to project modern capitalism onto a Ming Dynasty rebel.
Fair point, fair point.
Because what he is doing is actually far more radical than a business acquisition. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Buyu is rejecting the ontological foundation of his own society.
How do you?
Well, the Yi distinction wasn't just a border policy. It was the defining cultural reality of the era. By claiming all humans are one body and erasing the line between civilized and barbarian, Buyu isn't just saying he wants to be the new emperor.
Right.
He is saying the entire moral architecture Zhongli uses to justify his power is a hallucination.
Wow. He is invalidating the categories themselves. That is a wildly dangerous thing to vocalize while staring down the barrel of an imperial army.
It is incredibly rare in this type of literature. Usually a rebel justifies their rebellion by arguing that the current emperor is corrupt, right? That he has lost the divine mandate.
Yeah, that's the standard trope.
Exactly. But Buyu is arguing that the divine mandate doesn't exist at all, only capability exists.
Yeah.
And he backs up this philosophical egalitarianism with brutal realpolitik. And to be clear, we are just looking impartially at the arguments presented in the text here. But Buyu points out a glaring historical fact. He says, when we paid you tribute, you didn't attack us. You accepted our money. But now armies are raised. So all these grand speeches about benevolence are irrelevant. The only truth left is victory.
It's an absolute philosophical checkmate. I mean, Zhongli is anchored in established hierarchy and paternalism. Baiyu is anchored in natural equality and merit. They have completely exhausted the utility of words.
They really have.
Neither can persuade the other because they don't share a common premise for reality. Because their philosophical frameworks are completely incompatible, the only remaining vocabulary they actually share is violence.
Which perfectly forces the transition from this lofty debate into the gritty physical duel.
And the contrast between that high-minded rhetoric and the sheer ugliness of the fight is brilliant narrative design.
It really is.
The text throws us into this grueling 80-round combat sequence. Just imagine 80 continuous clashes on horseback, spears and broadswords slamming into each other, and neither man can gain an inch.
They are perfectly matched.
Physically matched, just as their arguments were. So Buyu realizes he cannot win through raw capability. What does the general of high talent do? He cheats. The text describes him selling a flaw.
Yeah, let's explain the mechanics of that, because selling a flaw isn't just running away. It's a highly technical psychological trick in horseback combat.
Right. How does that actually work in practice, like on the field?
Well, you don't just flee. You intentionally drop your guard for a fraction of a second. You make your opponent believe they finally outsmarted you.
Okay.
You trigger their greed for the kill, and that forces them to overcommit and chase you, breaking their own defensive posture in the process.
So Buyu fakes this weakness, turns his horse, and bolts. Zhongli, whose blood is obviously up, gives chase, but the text explicitly notes he stays cautious.
Right. He's smart. He suspects a trap.
And he's right. Suddenly, Buyu twists around in his saddle, draws a bow, and fires a backward arrow right at Zhongli's face.
Really close.
Zhongli barely dodges it. The text says the arrow grazes right past his ear.
Literally an inch away from the debate ending in a fatality.
Exactly. So Zhongli survives the trap, and immediately he flips the script. Now Zhongli, the honorable defender of imperial morality, turns his horse and flees.
Right.
Buyu, thinking he now has the actual advantage, chases after him. But as Buyu pursues, Zhongli secretly pulls out a concealed flying knife and hurls it backward.
And the dirty trick.
Yeah. Buyu is sharp, though. He sees the glint of the blade, throws up his massive broadsword and deflects it. But the knife still manages to graze him, leaving a tiny, thread-like scratch on his face.
Ah, the famous mark like a thread.
Yes. And startled by how incredibly close he just came to taking a knife to the eye, Buyu turns and retreats for real.
And Zhongli.
Zhongli, having narrowly escaped death himself just a moment ago, doesn't pursue. A messy general melee breaks out between the rank-and-file soldiers, and eventually the gongs sound, and both armies retreat to their camps.
What a sequence.